Hey Amarillo, I'm Jason Boyette, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. This week's episode is sponsored by Jimmy John's Gourmet Sandwiches. Jimmy John's has 3 locations in Amarillo, 2 along I-40 and 1 downtown near the ballpark. These franchise locations are owned and operated by an Amarillo resident, and he wants you to know that Jimmy John's has just introduced its new Mediterranean wrap, which features hummus, feta cheese, fresh veggies, and breezy Mediterranean vibes. There's a veggie version and a chicken version for you to try. Thanks to the locally owned Jimmy John's for sponsoring the show. As part of this podcast partnership with Brick and Elm Magazine, I want to give a podcast shout out to Amarillo ISD. The July-August issue of Brick and Elm is available now. It's in print, or you can find it online at brickandelm.com. I wrote the cover feature about ice cream. It was fun. Today's guest is Dr. Amy von Lintel. Amy is a professor of art history at West Texas A&M, as well as the director of its gender studies program. Her PhD is in art history, and that has meant a lot of research and writing about art related to this area. For instance, with Dr. Bonnie Roos at WT, she's the co-author of the book Expanding Abstract Expressionism, Women Artists and the American West. She has also written about Georgia O'Keeffe's time in Amarillo and Canyon. We're going to talk a little bit about that, about Georgia O'Keeffe's wartime Texas letters, about Robert Smithson and Amarillo Ramp. And Amy has a book coming out next year called Art at the Crossroads, which is about the aesthetics of the Texas Panhandle. For all its flatness and the harsh living conditions, this is a surprisingly creative and influential area in the art world, and Amy is the Panhandle's premier expert on what that looks like and why it exists, and we talk about it in this episode. I really enjoyed it because I'm into this stuff. Also, she co-owns a brewery here in Amarillo, which is really fun. We talk about that too. Here's Amy von Lintel. Dr. Amy von Lintel, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we've known each other for a few years, but I'm honored to have you here and eager to hear more about your story. And I want to start with you the same way I start with all my guests, and that's just to ask you why you're here. So what brought you to this area in the first place?
Well, that's a really good question. Maybe a long story, but I won't drag it out too much.
Well, we got about 45 minutes.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because, a lot of people come here for a job, and I did too. I came here for the academic job at West Texas A&M University. It was the most permanent position I was offered after my graduate work at USC in Southern California. And I had lived in Texas before. I had done some graduate work at SMU in Dallas. And so Texas felt like a home that I could, nest into. And one of my goals when I was looking for jobs was something a day's drive from my hometown of Kansas City. Okay. So it worked in that way too.
So originally from Kansas City,
yes.
You got some Midwest, background.
Definitely.
Does Amarillo feel different? I know there's a lot of connection between the architecture in Amarillo and in Kansas City. Does it feel like a different sort of climate, culture from what you grew up with? That's
a great question. So a few years ago, Michael Grauer and I did an exhibition at Panhandle Plains Historical Museum that traced the sister cityhood of Kansas City and Amarillo. So yes, some of the neighborhoods and the architecture, architects from Kansas City came here and built. So there's that. And some of the neighborhoods feel a little bit like the neighborhoods where I grew up in, but also the lack of trees and hills. Every time I go home to Kansas City, I'm always enamored with how tall the trees are and how thick the leaves are and the rolling hills. But what I love about Amarillo is that it's a lot of different regions overlapping. So, the Southwest and the West, but also the Midwest, Texas, the South. I like that hybridity. Yeah. And so,
it's a complicated identity here.
Absolutely.
We don't know what we are, or it's hard to define.
I like that aspect because I've lived in the West, out in California, and I loved it. I fell in love with the arid American West. And this place has a lot of that, which is contrasting to Kansas City in a good way.
Okay.
So
tell me how you got into art history as a career, as an academic focus? Why did your career path take that direction?
That's another great question. I did my undergrad at the University of Kansas, so pretty close to my home. And I couldn't decide if I was going to major in history. I always loved history, or chemistry, because in my high school, I was really excelling in the study of materials and chemical compounds and this and that. And I took art history as an elective, and it just had all the parts that I wanted. I love studying history from a material culture perspective, the objects and the people rather than just texts.
Okay.
And so I fell in love with it that way, and then did master's in art history and PhD in art history, and kind of never looked back. But I had some really good instructors at University of Kansas that said, "Why are you not majoring in this? You really seem to like it." And I did. So
Okay. Tell me about then coming to WT, because I know like once you go through all the schooling, you get your master's, your PhD. If you're interested in teaching, then like you could end up anywhere. And so there's what's offered to you, and like you said, what might be more permanent. But I feel like you also probably had a choice of where you wanted to go. So tell me about choosing this area, or WT specifically.
Absolutely. So, and I write about this in the intro, actually, of my forthcoming book, Art at the Crossroads. I kind of tell the story of falling in love with this place the first time I visited for my interview, but it took a minute. At first, I looked around, it was March, and all the plants were kind of dead, and it was like brown and flat. And I'd been living in Pasadena, which is always year-round, really like colorful and
it's not a fair comparison.
Not a fair comparison. And I remember calling my husband and said, "I don't know if I can do this." But the second day, so the first day was just like, kind of bureaucracy and benefits and this kind of thing, campus tour. Second day was the teaching stuff. And I fell in love with the students here. They are hungry for knowledge, supportive, inquisitive, creative. I could already tell that. And so, yes, it was one of the positions that seemed the best career-wise, but it was also something that I knew fit me really well. I also liked being the only art historian on faculty because I got some freedom to teach my areas of interest, and they've always let me do that. I could kind of build a program and, sort of vision-oriented. And then the third thing I would say is that before I moved here, I was not an Americanist. I was working on European art, and I had no idea I would fall in love with George O'Keeffe. But that idea of, I remember giving my teaching demo during the interview, and I had looked up what art is here. And I was surprised.
Were you? Okay.
Yes.
So it wasn't necessarily on your radar as
not
an art
until
historian.
I started looking. Yes. It wasn't on my radar at all.
Okay.
At all, 0. But then when I had to prep for that interview, and I wanted to make sure the students knew I could teach here, I found more than I expected. And I keep, year after year after year finding more. And so, yes, so it was sort of serendipitous, sort of a good fit. I knew that good fit feel was there from the beginning, and I've never really looked back.
Okay.
So yeah, it's kind of nice. I've been there for 14 years, and I definitely think I got a good vibe from this place. Like, this can work. This is me. This fits me well. I can build and grow here. It's not as big as somewhere like LA. I couldn't have gotten a job there. It's very hard to get a job there. But also it's too big for me. I like the size here.
Okay. I wanted to ask about that because people within the art world, especially people in the academic side, might not think of WT as a university known for its art program. Ag is big here. There's a lot of nursing and teaching, education, all that kind of stuff. But like nobody thinks, oh, I'm interested in art, I want to go to WT. Is that, you talk about the flexibility to build the program and what you want to do because it's not huge here. And I wonder if that's something that is attractive to people in academia, that it's not necessarily big in what they're focused on, and that gives them maybe a lot of influence. I
think that, and also discovering that, if we were founded, WT was founded as a normal school, which was an education college in 1910. Very quickly after that, George O'Keeffe was here as head of art department. So yes, it might not seem that we have this deep art history kind of thing at WT, but it was there. And so that is alluring for me to think of what a deep history the art program has at WT. And then also the idea of the students being, like you get to teach them what they maybe didn't remember, but they've lived it, and you get to discover with them those histories.
Okay.
But you asked if it was like for an academic, a kind of like surprise factor.
Is there a draw when it is a small program?
Oh, yes, that's the other thing I was going to say. Absolutely. Small program because you get to know your colleagues really well, and they encourage interdisciplinary teaching and collaboration. And so I've been able to write books with my colleagues. I've been able to team teach over and over again with some amazing colleagues. So even if the art program is quite small within a department that's hybrid already, we're art, theater, and dance, so art isn't even its own department right now. We still are a pretty tight-knit little group, and we get to know our students very, very well. And we get to see them, you ask about teaching, that it's a big part of this area. And a lot of our students go on to be teachers. Okay. And I think education is something that it's not a backup plan around here. It's something that people are passionate about and have been for 100 years. So I think that this place, the rootedness in education fit me well. I kind of saw myself being at like a liberal arts college or something that's very education-oriented, teaching-oriented, student-oriented. And I think WT is absolutely that. So I think it had the whole package for me, like some of the stuff that I was looking for, sort of inspiring art in the area, inspiring students, a dedication to student-centric environment, all that stuff.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about, you talk about the surprise getting here and seeing how much of an arts culture was here already, how much of a history and an influential history. And we were talking before we started, both of us can kind of nerd out on art stuff because I'm interested in that too. But I want to give listeners an idea of the depth of Amarillo and the Texas Panhandle within the larger American art community, because I know we have Georgia O'Keeffe's history here. Panhandle Plains Museum is a huge repository of Western art. We've got Frank Lloyd Wright House, we've got Amarillo Ramp, we've got the Dynamite Museum, Cadillac Ranch, a lot of public art. And so can you talk about and I've not listed 5 or 6 things I'm sure that you know about. So talk about the Texas Panhandle within the larger art world and sort of maybe the reputation we have, the influence that we've had, because you are the area's expert in that.
I would first say I think one of the things that I was most surprised about is the art patronage here. Okay. And Bonnie and my book, 3 Women Artists, really focused on
and that's Bonnie Roos.
Bonnie Roos, yes, Dr. Bonnie Roos at WT. We focused on Dord Fitz, who was a dealer and an artist, but also an art educator. And he would drive around to all these little towns in the Panhandle, educating adult learners, so not professional artists in training, but just adult learners, about abstract art. And so I think, I didn't, and I still don't, I don't teach a lot of traditional American West art history, like Remington and Russell. Sure. That's not my area of interest. But what I loved finding here was that there was this dedication by patrons and artists to modern art, to abstract art, to contemporary art. I mean, you mentioned Robert Smith's and the Amarillo Ramp. So it's not just the kind of regional art one would expect to find here. It's got these pockets of other surprising things that are networked to New York City or things that are networked to LA, like Ed Ruscha, who was an Oklahoma-based artist but also worked in LA, came through here, took photographs of the Standard Station and did this whole series based on the Amarillo Standard Station.
An iconic painting.
Yes. But he does prints, he does paintings, he does photos. He made an entire body of work based on the Amarillo Station, not because it was Amarillo, but because of the aesthetics of it. And so I don't think every artist is like, yay, Amarillo. But I think what has happened is this kind of organic collaboration between patrons who are dedicated to outreach and education. I said that earlier. Dord Fitz was an educator. I think he was maybe as good of an educator as an artist. I'm not going to say better, but I think his talents were definitely in training and outreach and teaching. And he brought in these artists that were women that Bonnie and my book focus on, but they were teachers too. So one of the reasons they continued to get patrons was through teaching. O'Keeffe was here as a teacher. She was not here as an artist. She didn't even see herself as the famous artist yet.
Right. It was early in her career.
Yes, absolutely. So this idea of maybe we wind up here for another reason other than the art culture, but we keep building this art culture organically over the years. And that's the surprising factor. Not that we have maybe the Panhandle Plains that's dedicated to Western art history. That's almost the expected part, but there's more than that. And then you can learn about how, like, I didn't know about the Taos artists, but now I do. And now I teach them as like old friends because they're right there in the Panhandle Plains.
Right.
But then I got to teach in Taos this summer and got to go to the museums there, the Blumenschein House and the Harwood, and, like said hello to all my old friends, the Taos artists. So this idea of like continued learning and connection and networking, we think it's isolated. It's not that isolated even in the art world.
Right. And those places like Taos, the Taos Colony, Santa Fe have larger reputations maybe in the art world, but are still very Amarillo adjacent just because of the proximity to similar landscape, all those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And they share artists back and forth. And, some of the founders of the PPHM were connected to the Taos artists. You know this. But I think that networking thing that is anti-isolation is something else I'm really interested in. And I won't quit studying it because the threads are almost endless. They keep coming up, and the more you dig, the more you find.
I want to talk about Georgia in a minute. Before that, I want to double click on what you said about patronage, because one of the things that I think is really unique about this area is there is a lot of generational wealth because of ranching, because of petroleum, and so there are people in Amarillo, in the Texas Panhandle, with really impressive art collections. Which spans from American contemporary art to like Renaissance art,
absolutely,
Asian art, from
Impressionists, you name it.
And so there's so many shows that's somebody's personal collection. I'm just like, that is a stunning thing to find in the Texas Panhandle.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about that and some of the stuff maybe that you've seen as a result of your expertise and those collections.
One of the things I've been really impressed with is the generosity of those people to want to share. Now, that could be like the Ritchie family sharing their work at AMOA, Amarillo Museum of Art. But also the lads, Peggy Ladd, when I first moved here, she allowed my students, like a group, let's say 20 students, to come into her home and explore her collection. That generosity of sharing and not being closed, but it goes back to that education thing. People here, no matter what level of socioeconomic class or, where they fit into the system here, they're dedicated to students learning and people learning from them and sharing. It's not closed. The art culture here is very open and people want to share. So I would start with them. And then the lads, of course, had this surprising collection of Emil Bestrom late paintings. It was so fun to research a new artist and come out of that having researched the Transcendental Painting Group, connecting to all these other artists that worked even in Amarillo, and books that are now published that I teach with. I mean, it just all keeps building. But it's not a force fit thing. It's just like a spillage into your world when you start paying attention.
One thing I think about a lot, and thinking of those art patrons, is that, when you do have somebody who, for whatever reason, ends up with more money than they can spend, there's maybe a misconception about Texans, that we're going to build big, ugly houses, or we're going to drive gaudy Cadillacs, or buy, tons of ranch land, whatever. And the fact that many of these people who had this money chose to invest in beauty, in art, in creative work that means something to them, that's something I think about a lot, because it does feel a little bit surprising and counter to maybe our reputation outside the state.
Yeah, I mean, the one example that popped into my mind while you were speaking about that was the Amarillo Museum of Art itself as a building, or like the Frank Lloyd Wright House, right? The fact that we have this amazing modern architecture by these leading architects because of the patronage that wanted to bring beauty, not just into their home with the painting collection, but also to the city itself. And so, yeah, I think that kind of like appreciation of a wide range of aesthetic beauty is here, and that willingness to spend and share. I think philanthropy is another big thing in this area, but the philanthropy to create beauty in a place where, I mean, I find this place very beautiful, but even just the urban space has been shaped by people. Like when Bonnie and I are dealing with the 3 Women Artists book, there were so many, like the Bivens family has been an amazing patron of modern art, of women artists, but also helping build the Amarillo Museum of Art, right?
Sure.
So I'm kind of stumbling over my example here, but I think that it's really interesting when you start seeing one family and all of the things that they built. And even the Bivens family building, I mean, one of the chapters in my forthcoming book is about aviation aesthetics, right? So the idea of making the Bivens neighborhood originally the airport,
right,
and now it's a beautiful neighborhood of homes.
Yeah. Julian Boulevard was a runway.
Exactly. So that idea of the surprising aesthetics that come through patronage and that come through people having a vision and being willing to spend the money on the vision. Yes, ranching, yes, oil, yes, media, but also art.
Okay. So I need to talk to you about Georgia O'Keeffe because you are, I don't know, one of the foremost experts in Georgia.
Georgia's
for sure
life
in this
in
area,
Texas,
in
which
Texas,
is very short.
But it's a narrow slice. I don't want to
Okay.
presume that everybody listening knows Georgia O'Keeffe, knows about her connection to Amarillo. So I want to give you the opportunity, you know, this is not a full hour of art history class, but give us, 5 minutes, 10 minutes on why she matters, why her connection to Amarillo is so important here and outside here.
Why one maybe should know about Georgia O'Keeffe is that she is the highest grossing woman artist to sell a painting for the highest price. She is world renowned. Within the last 10 years, she's gotten international accolades, where before that she was pretty much known as an American artist. But she has been a successfully, a blue chip American artist for years. But also she's an abstractionist. So she does images of, bones or flowers or landscapes or the canyon or a sunset, those kind of things that people still, she has 1 foot in nature and 1 foot in abstraction. So I think that really appeals to people. Now, why she has anything to do with this area, back to the first question you asked me, why did I come here? It was for a job. She came here for a job too. So 1912, she wanted to be teaching at UVA, and they wouldn't hire women teachers except for the summer, and she needed some teaching experience. And so the Amarillo School District, brand new school district, was hiring New York trained teachers, right? And so the School of Art Education that was the most premier school was Columbia Teachers College, and O'Keeffe had experience there. So she also had like a connection that said, hey, come out here in Amarillo. But by the time she arrived in 1912, that one connection had passed away. So she shows up way, way, way far away via train from her family, from what she knows, and hits the ground running teaching in the public school.
Which is still astounding.
Astounding.
That somebody, even back then, someone who had the training that she did. I mean, this was not somebody who was trained at, University of Texas at Austin. Nope. This was somebody who went to a premier art school.
Yes.
And
Art education school.
Right.
So she was trained not to be an artist, but to teach art.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting.
And they came to this brand new school district in a city of, 15, 20,000 back then?
It was small.
It was growing, but we were
growing
new.
but small.
Yeah.
Those brick streets that we hear about, that you guys write about in Brick and Elm, right? You're named after the brick streets. They were being laid right while she was here, right? So this building of an urban setting, she witnessed so much of that, but she also witnessed cowboys coming in off the street and gambling in the hotel where she was staying, right? So she really was living the kind of Old West life a little bit and was drawn to that. That's another reason she writes about, I went out there because I loved cowboy stories. When I was little, I was, my mom read cowboy stories to me. So there was a lot of allure, but I think it was practical in addition to kind of mythological. I want to go out there and experience the real West. But she also was willing to say after a year, she wanted a raise. And no, after 2 years, she asked for a raise, didn't get it. So she's like, I'm going to go back and get some more education, just like one does when the job doesn't work out perfectly. But then she got tapped in 1916 to come back to the area in Canyon to the brand new, West Texas State Normal School. And she was asked to be the head of the art department. Now, mind you, there was only one person, just her.
She was the art department.
That's a step up, right? So she was using this kind of career building strategy in the area not through art, but art teaching. And she was teaching strange things too, like drawing makes sense, okay, but also fashion design and things like this. She wasn't teaching like traditional artists. She was teaching women teachers how to incorporate art or drawing into their classrooms. And she taught here for 2 years and then she left, right? So not even 2 years, that idea of a very brief moment in her life, but it was also a moment where she produced so many beautiful watercolors, a few oils. She was very prolific. She was sending things back to New York. She was getting in touch with the dealer that would then become her husband in the future, and he was putting her work on the wall in New York City. So she starts to be an artist right while she's here, and she starts to fall in love with the American West right while she's here. She winds up moving later in her life to New Mexico to a landscape that looks a lot like the Palo Duro Canyon, but it has more of an art culture there. So it makes sense why she would be there and not come back here. But yeah, foundational, but very brief.
I want to talk about the influence of this area because while she was here, like you said, she was not the famous Georgia O'Keeffe. And she left here. She was only here for a brief period of time. But the landscape of Palo Duro Canyon, the skies here, like the development of her talent here, had a lot of influence. So instead of talking about Georgia's influence, let's talk about the Panhandle's influence on her work.
Well, if you'll allow me to promote the book that is her letters book that I did, she wrote prolifically private letters from the area here between 1916 and 1918. It just came out in paperback, so one can get it again. It's been out of print for a little bit. It's with Texas A&M Press. But what you learn in that book is she writes about every kind of influence that she's having, the people she talks to, the storms she sees, the things she smells or tastes, the shooting guns, riding horses, whatever she experienced.
She was a very modern woman, like
very modern
early
woman.
20th century.
Modern, and she had, views that were a little bit surprising in this area. She dressed differently. She didn't go to church in the same way, but she vocalized those viewpoints in these letters. And so what we can see is just how inspired she was by this area. And what I love about that book, because I really spent a lot of time on the index, if you're interested in how she was inspired by the canyon, you can look that up. Or if she was inspired by the weather, you can look that up, right? She even calls herself like a tornado at one point. She felt like a tornado whirling around, sort of out of control. And so she's this poetic writer about a place that I've come to fall in love with. And I actually was reading those letters for that project when I first moved here. So she kind of taught me to love this area, right? So I learned to love it through her words, which was a pretty magical experience, honestly. So yes, it's about her, but also about how we can learn about this place through her words and through her paintings. Like her paintings are abstract and beautiful and absolutely virtuoso watercolor. And when you show students and you say, what is that? And once you tell them, oh, that's a sky with stars on a flat landscape. Oh, I see it. But then you go to New York City and people don't, what is that? And because she just had this major show in New York City and we actually took students there to see the show and they discovered their landscape on the walls of MoMA, right? So this idea that, we might get it viscerally on the ground, but she got it and she took it back to New York and kind of built her career on that. Her husband Sieglitz never came out here, so he was learning about this beautiful landscape only through her abstractions, right? So it's sort of interesting. He'll take a photo of her in front of one of them in a way that you can never tell what it was, but it's the canyon. Yeah. And once we know what it is, we can see it.
I wanted to talk broader about this area, not in terms of the patronage or the history, but just because it is... And this is a conversation I've had multiple times, that there's a creativity here that surprises outsiders, including yourself, probably. And I wonder if you can talk about why, if there's something you can pinpoint, living in a harsh landscape, living in a flat landscape, living in a place that isn't friendly to pioneers or farming or whatever. Why has such an art culture and a culture of creativity come out of this area?
I just taught a course in Taos, and we were looking at women artists of the Southwest, and we kind of hit on something. It comes from a phrase that Georgia O'Keeffe wrote. She called it living out, and there's lots of ways to interpret the out. But one of the things that she was interested in is the kind of wide open spaces and how, for a woman of her time, that allowed freedom. She moved away from her family. She moved away from the norms and conventions of society because it was small enough that she could walk unchaperoned into the wilderness if she wanted, just go to the canyon when she wanted. That idea of like being outside an area of maybe urban centrality, being outside of the coasts as a kind of predominant culture in America, being a woman. We looked at women who were car camping through the American West who would wear pants until they had to go into town to get something for the car, and then they'd have to put on a skirt.
Okay.
So I think the creativity that you're saying is this idea that like the doors are wide open, the space is wide open. There's not so many people telling you what you have to do. There's just not that many people, right? And so I think that freedom has really allowed a lot of creatives. And I would connect it to, say, like Taos or Santa Fe or the Southwest, but a lot of creatives to find freedom to just do something different, just do something new, and no one's going to tell them not to. I think that that's a very real feeling. You call it pioneering, call it middle of nowhere, call it vast, wide open spaces. Susan Gibson sings that song, Wide Open Spaces. You need that to like explore. And I think that that's so real.
There's an emptiness.
Yes.
And maybe because of the emptiness, there's a drive to create something, to fill it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I totally believe in that. I think maybe it's, I think it's psychological, but I think it's actually bodily too. Like I think our bodies feel that openness when you see a big sky or you're out in the middle of nowhere and you breathe the air and there's nothing around. I think it's real.
Okay, so I want to make a real hard switch.
Okay.
And there's no good way to do this. But like you're an art historian, you're teaching at an academic level. And that's all very brainy kind of stuff, let's say.
Yeah, okay.
You're also the co-owner of a brewery,
Yes.
which is very real on the street, middle of Amarillo kind of thing, which I think is a fascinating division of interests in your career. So tell me a little bit about Old Tascosa, which you started obviously with your husband, Matt, who's a really talented brewer. So tell me about that, its location on 6th Street, and like why that's also something you're doing.
Okay, so I would give Matt the credit more than me. I'm a co-owner among many other co-owners, but Matt is the brewmaster. This was his vision. He moved here for my job, so it was kind of his turn to follow a dream. And when we were in Los Angeles, he was, prior to that, right before we got married, he was in the military and he was a weatherman, right? So he decided that after we got married, he was going to separate from the military and moved out to LA without a job. And the first job that he got was brewing beer with Anheuser-Busch. So he was working on a 1,000-barrel system and fell in love with it, fell in love with the people and the culture and the science of it. I mean, you say, oh, a weatherman, but it's fluid dynamics. Like it's not completely unrelated. And so then when we moved here, he went back to school because he wanted to kind of further his education, do a master's at WT. They didn't have meteorology, so he did enviroscience. And again, focused on air quality and things like this, but all the while was brewing beer in our garage. And so he kept one foot in the kind of like beer world. And then he decided that this was a dream of his to be able to open a brewery in town because there's not that many. There's a few, Pondaseta being, the main one. We're good friends with them. We think they're amazing.
And it's still very recent to have a brewery in Amarillo. Like we've not have craft beer for 30 years like some towns in Colorado.
Well, so the story goes, there were a few startup ones, but they never lasted that long. And you can ask aficionados. I can't remember the name of but there have been a couple of them over the years. But, for one reason or another, we don't have a very rich craft beer culture like other places, even like other places of our size. So Matt was always like, okay, maybe this can work. And then we bought a building on Route 66. Mm-hmm. So, we have always loved kind of history of transportation and cross-country, crossroads and all of that. So we're like, oh, Route 66. And then it took us a long time to kind of get the brewery set up, but we opened in December and we have 10 beers on tap right now and a really wonderful space. It took a long time to kind of get the building up to date, coating, fire coating, all those things like roof and parking lot. And, it's not easy to kind of get a space ready for the public.
Yeah.
But we did it, and we're open now. And what I love about it is that a lot of people come in, don't expect, if I'm helping Matt out, that like someone pouring their beer can tell them all about Georgia O'Keeffe or about the history of Old Tascosa. But I get to do that all the time. And so lots of stories. We have art hung on the wall there. Each one has a story. So I think it's a great fit. Actually, it might seem weird, but it's a good fit.
I love the location. Right now, Pondasset is on the southwest side of town. You've got Six Car downtown. You've got Big Texan Brewery way out on I-40 on the east side. And you're on Route 66, which is very heavily traveled by tourists, being there on 6th Street. And I want to know, like, what have your first year of operation been like in terms of people finding you, locals finding you, travelers finding you?
So the traveler part has been really fun. We've had a lot of people that are going, say, from Dallas to Denver, and they come in. But we've also had international travelers, and that's really fun to get to. I studied French in college, and I haven't really spoken it for years and years. And this family came in who had been living in Paris. They were Portuguese, but they were speaking French to one another, and I just started speaking French to them. And Matt looked over and he goes, "I've never heard you speak French before," which is the weirdest thing. But I just, no, I don't speak French very well. Actually, don't make me speak French right now. But I was able to communicate with them, and they were just lit up with the fact that here's this person in kind of a rural area that wants to connect with them. They were warm and friendly. I was warm and friendly. It was really great. So, having that kind of international footprint in a place like Amarillo is one of the most fun aspects of it. But we've also had an amazing number of like locals and regulars that are now our friends. I feel like our friend group just grew like exponentially. And we love it when we can say hello to somebody who we feel like we know really well now. So there's a lot of aspects of it, like community. Breweries are often kind of community centers. If someone's not here with someone else, they can come as a lone person into a brewery and just find connection. That works really well. So we have a lot of people like that just come in, hang out, connect to us wherever they are living in the world. They tell us about breweries they love. They bring us stickers. We send them with stickers. Everyone's, trading stickers of breweries. It's a really fun life right now, actually. We're still kind of getting the word out there. We didn't have a huge advertising budget, right. But I think we're on the upswing, and I think the beer is good, so that helps, If the product ain't good, I don't know. But yeah, Matt's a good brewer.
So I know beyond art, beyond beer, that there's another thing that you're passionate about, and that's adoption, because it's very personal to your story, Matt's story, and your family. And I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about that and what that looks like, for a couple like you, doing a lot of different things, living here in Amarillo.
So we moved here in 2010, and we had not started our family yet. And we were talking about the plan to do that. And we realized just how many kids, I think we were actually sitting at Golden Light having a burger. And we said, I bet there's a kid within a mile of where we're sitting right now that needs help. And so we went through foster parent training through CPS. We also worked with A World for Children, which was a group that helps foster parents kind of liaise between CPS and the children. And I can't say enough about that group, because CPS is kind of like has too little time to kind of really focus on help for the foster parents. We were new foster parents. The woman who was our case manager has become one of our dearest friends. I would call her like a godmother to my kids, but wound up where we went from 0 to 2 children overnight, got the call that these 2 kids were needing an emergency placement. They were 6 and 7, 2 sisters, just about the cutest dang girls that you've ever seen. And they became our forever children. Okay. And so it took 2 years for them to be adopted. And one of them is at UT, and one of them starting this semester at Texas State in San Marcos. And we're pretty proud of that. And then we adopted a 3rd child after the girls got kind of stabilized, and that was our son, Thomas. All 3 of them, the girls were born at Northwest Hospital, and Thomas was born in Plainview. So all of them are local children. And, I think it's also hard. Adoption journey could be hard because of different upbringings or different cultures that are kind of almost like a blended family. And all three of my children are African American, and we've had to learn kind of how to have a multiracial household. But I think it's something I'm really proud of learning from them. You know, I teach African American art now in a way that I probably wouldn't have, and I'm just always interested in kind of, you know, bringing all my different realms together. And the other day, Shay, our daughter, helped Matt brew beer. So, you know, I mean, it's like you build a family, and we believe in big family. And I think that's also why the brewery feels like just the family just keeps growing and growing. But I do think adoption to me means something about how, and this could even go back to O'Keeffe, she had a lot of homes in her life, and she loved all of her homes. I think, you know, same with family. We meet people along the way. We can build different homes. We can adopt new things. We can be open to new experiences. So I think that's how they all go together in my mind. But yeah, I think that idea of being open to newness is a good thing.
Well, along those lines, can you talk a little bit about, I know as, you know, as parents of African-American children, like it requires a real intentionality to give them the space to connect with their culture because it's a different culture from what you grew up with. And I wonder, like, I know a number of multiracial families like this that take very specific steps because you want your kids to like the things that you're into, but like you want them also to discover their own heritage and to celebrate, you know, the differences that you have. And so I wonder, like, what are some ways, what does that look like in Amarillo? You know, because it is like almost every small town, it's complicated. Race is something not everybody likes to talk about.
I mean, we've had to learn to defer to them and not, like, if something happens at the park where someone will say something mean to them about their skin or their hair, we want to blow in there and just rescue them. And we've had to learn to step back and ask, how do you feel? Or what is this like for you? Tell me. I'm going to listen rather than be a hero, because I don't even know how to be a hero. But you get mad when someone that you love has been hurt and their feelings have been hurt. So we've been through those experiences. One of the most challenging things that we had to learn very early on, I'm not very good at hair and makeup. I can barely do my own hair. But, you know, Black hair culture for women is something that is complicated, expensive, important.
Yeah, meaningful.
And we have had, I don't want to name her. She'll know who she is if she hears this. She has been an incredible asset to our family since almost the day those girls moved in. She's been doing their hair and being part of their family, connecting them even with stories of their bio family that we have no access to for 10 years, I think. And so, you know, putting the girls in connection with someone who can answer questions, share stories, share experiences that we can't share with them it happened organically. I didn't go looking for that, but it's been something that I think is really, really important. So trying to always connect your kids to the biggest group of people and to make sure they have avenues to find that heritage, to talk about that heritage, to express frustrations. You know, like my daughter would say something where if she went over to another person's house, but who grew up with Black parents, and they would say something about a hot comb, and she would be like, I don't know what that is. And they would just be appalled. Like, who has been raising you that you do not know this? And then she'd have to say, well, I was raised by white people, right? But she has learned to say that without shame. She's learned to say that with, it is what it is. I didn't choose it, but it is what it is. I have to go an extra distance to teach myself some of those things that people grow up knowing. But I think that's true in any kind of like hybrid situation. Sometimes people even feel, you know, like, let's say your parents are from two different cultures. Am I this or that? Frida Kahlo, you know, she's German and she's Mexican. So how are you both? And you're not enough of either one. I mean, I think those things are so real. So we just try to keep lines open of communication. But I just feel like, you know, it's hard. It's confusing. It's sometimes defeating because you can't rescue someone from somebody else being mean. But we're trying to just learn and listen and grow, and we love our kids. Our parents and family has been incredibly open and welcoming to our kids. We're all part of a big family now. Of all the things that I find the most challenging, yeah, I can write a book about O'Keeffe or something, but, knowing how to navigate those tough waters, I think is really, it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your transparency on that. I think a lot of people will hear that and that will be encouraging because every parent deals with that and there's another level of it with adoption. Last question, you're a business owner here, you are an academic here, you write about this area. You probably didn't dream of ending up here. And I wonder, now that you've built a life here in Amarillo, what that's taught you about this area beyond Georgia O'Keeffe, beyond the arts culture, just as a resident here, sort of what you've come to love about where we live.
Oh, so many things. I think it makes me connect even back to my own extended family who settled in Western Kansas in an area that looks very much like this. So it was sort of a homecoming, but it's also a kind of discovery of so many new paths that have been rewarding, exciting, inspiring. And that goes for my kids, that goes for my husband's brewery, but also my students. I mean, God, when I look back over all the trips we've taken with our students, whether it's over to New Mexico, to Mexico City, we've taken students to Greece and England. We looked at the Elgin marbles in both places. I mean, this kind of thing where it's the people here that you connect to and then the kind of, networks and family and support systems that exist here. And even my colleagues that have, I remember when I was interviewing, Bonnie Roos took me around and was kind of like, okay, this is what it really looks like to live here. This is what it really feels like, And she's still now one of my absolute best friends. And so, yes, it's beautiful in a way that O'Keeffe saw, and I can go to the canyon and be inspired by the landscape. But just the fact that there are so many people who care so much about others or care about vision or care about students and education, I think that's the number one for me, the people.
This episode of Hey Amarillo is also supported by the Shops at Wolfland Square, which is celebrating 60 years and 4 generations of local ownership and management. Wolfland Square itself is a shopping center where most of the tenants are local. In fact, you've heard several of those entrepreneurs interviewed on this podcast. These shops attract thousands of patrons every day. The management works hard to make sure every tenant succeeds, offering free social media marketing for all tenants with a regular schedule of community events throughout the year, including holiday open house. Learn more by visiting wolflandsquare.com or visit any of the shops at Wolfland Square. Okay, I'm back with Amy Von Lintel. Amy, this is part of the show I call 8 Straight. It's sponsored every week by Panhandle Plains Historical Museum and Canyon. I know you're familiar with it.
Yay!
It's the largest. It's the largest history museum in Texas. Its permanent collection includes a painting related to Georgia O'Keeffe's experience living in Canyon between 1916 and 1918. It's called Red Landscape. They have a number of other Georgia O'Keeffe related items, but that's kind of the jewel of the collection. I think it's on loan right now to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum.
Oh, is it?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either. It does leave sometimes.
I do know it left at one point. I don't know if it's come back.
Okay.
But I have seen it there. It's fantastic. And I'm sure you know all about it. So you can see that at panhandleplains.org if it's not visible within the physical bounds of the museum itself. Okay, when you think about Amarillo 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
More tourism and outside investment. I think one of the things that I've studied is Guy Carlander, who's one of the local architects, and he had in his archives, he had these dreams that there would be a highway going all the way through, like an interstate through downtown, and that we'd need these high-rise parking garages on each side. Okay, that's not what I want, but I do like this idea of getting back to growth, because the Air Force Base shut down in '68, and it really constricted the city in measurable ways. And so if the I-27 corridor does turn into that interstate, yes, exactly, between Canada and Mexico, I don't think it'll happen in 10 years. We know this. I don't even think I-27 to Canyon's going to be done in 10 years.
I would be surprised.
But I like that idea that, we're already pretty crossroads networked, but let's go bigger, bring more people in. And, it can't hurt the brewery, but I think, I think it's a goal.
Okay, yeah. Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
I think inertia, people are very in their comfort zones. I've seen some excellent restaurants close that are not burgers or barbecue. So maybe just a little bit of like re-energizing with that newness I was talking about, and kind of going out and trying new things, and supporting new local businesses, making sure we do that. So a little bit of like get out of your comfort zone. Okay. And I'm the same way. I like my same patterns. So this is something that I need to do better.
Okay, yeah, same here. What does this area not have enough of?
I think I would say like the grasslands that it used to have. When like the Comanche Empire was dominant, you had buffalo, and then 1876, I've been studying Old Tascosa, you had sheep grazing. It was just like long grasses, grazing land, open grazing land. And then, cattle too. So the idea of that grazing land would be more fire safe than some of the areas that we have now. And I mean, this is all pipe dreams. It can't go back to that. But I think, maybe a little bit more of sustainable ecology on a big picture, or maybe sort of getting us back to planting some of that grassland that isn't just, like not going to blow around like dirt all the time.
There's a phrase I've run into either reading like, Larry McMurtry's Westerns or older writings about the seas of grass in this area. And, because agriculture, because of cattle, all that kind of stuff, like those are no longer here, other than a few protected places.
And I'm Midwestern. Yeah. And it's something about that, just thinking of those grasslands and the natural ecology of that, for what that's worth.
Okay, what's your favorite local neighborhood?
I would definitely say historic Route 66, which sits in San Jacinto. And I think San Jacinto is a very interesting neighborhood, one of the oldest in Amarillo. Right now it's sort of economically depressed. I think we could put more effort into bringing it back a bit. There's some really great efforts by businesses on Route 66 about that, even like low-income vet care, things like this that are really inspiring. So going more with that. I'll also plug the neighborhood where I live, which is by Sam Houston Park. A beautiful neighborhood zoned by Guy Carlander, curving streets, old trees, cottage houses.
Sunset Terrace, right?
Yes, Sunset Terrace.
Is that considered part of San Jacinto? Or is it just very adjacent to
It's called Country Club.
Okay.
Because it was originally zoned called Country Club, and then the Country Club was also built by Guy Carlander, like the building. And then there's Country Club 2, which is over on that side toward the club. So it is actually not San Jacinto technically, like not even like on our deed to our house or something.
Right. But it's a half mile from your business,
the same big old part of Amarillo that I love, and quirky and artsy, and you still find the signs around, right?
Architecturally diverse areas.
Architecturally diverse. You find the Dynamite Museum signs there. Like, I just love it. It's my zone.
What's your favorite local restaurant?
This one, I can't even answer with one. What I'm going to say is that we have some really good pizza restaurants, and they've been working with us to put our beers under their tap. So I'm going to give them a shout out between Fire Slice, 575, Pizza Nomad, even Sad Monkey Mercantile does pizza, and they have our beer on tap. So the pizza people have been amazing to work with, and I love pizza. So I'll say that. And then I also love eating on any of the restaurants on historic Route 66, all the way from Golden Light, the oldest, and maybe the newest is Little Louse. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
but
so.
I really like them too.
I've not been there yet, but I've heard great things.
It's excellent. So is Bracera's, Smokey Joe's. Like, you can't go wrong.
Okay. What's the most underrated aspect of living in Amarillo?
I would say the art, and that's kind of like, when we were trying to figure out the title of this next forthcoming book, The Art of the Crossroads, the subtitle is The Surprising Aesthetics of the Texas Panhandle. And our point there was that, there is we were talking about patronage, we were talking about hidden art aspects. I think, when you know, but not everybody knows. And especially things like Amarillo Ramp, most people don't know.
Right.
My students do, because we drill it into their head. But if you don't have an art education, you might miss it. But I don't think you can miss the murals, right? I think it's just kind of exploding grassroots in a way that even if you don't realize that you're living in an art city, you are. And so, the idea of it's underrated, but starting to be even felt by people who don't already have an art background.
Okay, yeah, it's a little bit more in their faces.
It's
than
getting
it used
in
to
their
be.
faces,
And I like that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes, I do too.
Okay, this may be hard for you, but this is a question I just wanted to ask you. What's your favorite piece of Amarillo-related art? And it doesn't have to be about Amarillo, but it's got to have an Amarillo connection, whether we can see it, whether it's something that Georgia painted, you know?
Okay. It is going to be something Georgia painted, but it's the train painting, the little watercolor in the Amarillo Museum of Art of a train. And the reason why I picked this one is because it gets at that vast landscape on such a little scale because it doesn't have anything other than the train. So it's sort of wide open space. The train is just a few marks on the page, but then the steam that comes out of the train is this kind of like rainbow colored pluming. And so that idea of the beauty and the nothingness is in there, but also the networking, right? She came here on a train. Trains and cars and planes were all kind of like connecting Amarillo in this way. So I think that's just like a perfect encapsulation of the art and the culture and the promise and the bigness and the vastness of Amarillo.
Okay, and that's one that people can see in the collection.
Good question. It's
AMOA?
absolutely in the collection, but it's
it
a
permanently
watercolor.
out?
No,
Okay.
it's a watercolor, so they can't leave it permanently out. But the staff there will pull it out for you anytime.
Okay.
It's beautifully framed, so safe to kind of see. But you might have to Amarillo Museum of Art to this day is still free for anybody who wants to go in. But you might have to make a little request, and it's okay. So
I have seen it, so I imagine it was on display not very long ago.
Yes, it's been on and off display. They pull it out as much as they can, but they can't permanently install it because of the delicacy of the watercolor and light.
Okay. Final question. When was the last time you visited Cadillac Ranch?
Okay, so 2 times, but I want to talk about 2, please. Once when my daughters were adopted on their adoption day. It was 2014. They were 9 and 10. And right after the judge said, "You're adopted, you're part of our family, we're part of your family," we went out there and spray painted onto the cars. And then, but that was a while ago. John Rivette, my colleague in art, theater, and dance, we took honor students out there in a snowstorm. And this was maybe 2 years ago. And the students met this cute little couple from England, and the guy was showing them his car and his house on his phone. He's like sharing his English world with them, and they were sharing their world with him. And no one else was out there because it was freezing and it was a snowstorm. But the idea that people come together around the art in Amarillo, and I believe that that's true for Cadillac Ranch, or you use art to celebrate like a journey, like the adoption journey. And it was a way of us kind of nesting and homing ourselves here. So.
Okay. I love that. I love that there's a personally meaningful story and an educational story.
Yes.
Okay. That concludes the 8 straight questions. I like to close by asking my guests to endorse something. So what's one thing you would like listeners to know about or to experience?
I would like to endorse investment, both private and public, in historical preservation.
Okay.
It has not been easy for us even to retrofit a very, very simple building on Route 66 with the kind of fire coating and this kind of stuff that you need. But I think that investment by city money, nobody wants to pay higher taxes, I get it, but also by any private funds to make sure that some of the really old, interesting buildings in Amarillo are not just blight, not just empty. Mm-hmm. And we don't want Amarillo to look like every other city all across America. We want it to have its own flavor. Mm-hmm. And I think that takes time, commitment, and money. But I think it's a really worthy cause. And, I'll put my money where my mouth is.
And you have. Right?
We have, and I believe in it. And it's been fun. And it's something, it connects past to future, right? Because Amarillo's past is rich and interesting, and our architectural legacy is here. But also, if that growth that I want to happen happens, I want that historical legacy to be here for people to see, and not just new buildings built. I think the old buildings are still really worthy.
I appreciate that. Amy Von Lintel, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Lots of good things to talk about. I could talk to you all day.
I'm sure you could. I wish we could go longer. And that concludes the episode. Thanks to Amy for the interview. You can find links to all of her books at wtamu.edu. Just search for her name. Or check in with a local bookstore like Burrowing Owl. Thanks also to Wolfland Square, Jimmy John's, and Panhandle Plains Historical Museum for supporting this podcast. And as always, to Angelina Marie for editing the show. Thank you for listening. Hey Amarillo exists on a weekly basis because of listeners like you and the local people who support it financially through patreon.com/heyamarillo. Hey Amarillo's executive producers include Patrick Burns, Jason Burr, Katie Linker, Corey Burns, Josh Wood, Wes Reeves, Cindy Graham, and Barbara and Jim Whitten. This has been episode 365. So if anyone wants to listen to the entire history of this show, now you can download one episode every day and finish in a year. You're welcome. My name is Jason Boyett, and I'll see you next week.